Commemorating World Environment Day on Now is brought to you by the Ministry of Planning and Development and the United Nations Development Programme.
All right, so welcome back inside the Now Morning Show. Thank you so much for staying with us. This morning we continue to talk about World Environment Day and what you can do to help play your part in saving the environment. And to discuss this morning a little bit about land degradation, I want to welcome Mr. Julius Smith. He's an environmental biologist and he works at the Environmental Policy and Planning Division inside the Ministry of Planning and Development. Good morning, Mr. Smith.
Hi, good morning, Rokas, and good morning to your audience.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Now, land degradation, right? I want to start off with defining it because I live on a hill and I see erosion happening all the time. Is it that people who only live on hills or by riverbanks should be concerned about land degradation?
No, I think everybody should be concerned about land degradation. And to answer your question, land degradation just is a term that applies to any negative change in the integrity of land as it relates to its productivity and vegetative cover.
Okay, so we're talking about land that you're going to be able to plant, or it doesn't matter whether you can or you do plant the land or not?
Well, we use land for everything. That land is where we live, and it is the platform for our existence in terms of providing our biodiversity, regulating and provisioning services. And when I say regulating, things like our nutrient cycles for air and potable water. Right. And in terms of provisioning services, materials that we use that facilitate our existence, like lumber, agricultural crops, etc.
Okay, so land degradation has been identified also as an environmental issue, and it should be of a concern to small island developing states in particular. Why is that?
Because of our size. Those of us that live in the insular Caribbean, we live on small islands, which means that land is a very finite resource.
Yeah.
We don't have the luxury of being able to use land in a disposable manner. So in other words, as opposed to a continental country like Guyana or Brazil, for example, you could arguably use land exhaustively for any given purpose. And then when that usefulness has been fulfilled, you can move on to another plot of land without there being much consequence. You can't do that when land is of a very limited nature, as in a small island state.
Okay, understandable. Makes sense. All right, so then tell me about the National Action Plan and how it's intended to work then.
Okay, so it's called the National Action Program, and it's an obligation that the country has under the UN Convention to combat desertification. Now, we don't suffer from desertification, but we suffer from land degradation, and we also suffer from drought in our part of the world. And what the National Action Program does, it's a synthesis of all of our policies and laws and programs or projects which apply to sustainable land management. And one of the key elements under this National Action Program, or NAP, which we call for short, is land degradation neutrality. And land degradation neutrality is a concept whereby we seek to stabilize the quality and quantity of land that's required to provide us with a stable ecosystem services.
Right. But how are we going to do that?
Well, chiefly by restoring degraded lands and conserving lands that are already in a non-degraded state. So what we've done so far is that we've utilized data, satellite or remote sensing data, to determine that approximately half of the land, or just over half of the land in the country, is in a degraded state. In other words, if you use the three metrics of vegetative cover, productivity, and soil organic carbon, our land is not in an optimum state. And therefore, to try to address that imbalance, what we should do is looking at conserving lands that are ecologically pristine or are in an ecologically good order, and restore areas that have suffered from degradation.
I'm curious, like these areas that suffer from degradation, is places that are more occupied, like where the urban cities, that kind of land they're talking about, or in general?
Yeah, that is included. Sorry to cut you across, but but that's not necessarily so, because we've got areas that are in our rural parts and regions of the country that have been degraded through one process or another. For example, if you look at the northeast section of Trinidad in particular, which we use for quarrying to get aggregates to support the construction industry, that has suffered a fair amount of degradation, and that becomes particularly apparent if you fly over the country.
Yeah.
So what we can do in those areas, or what we're attempting to do, is to regenerate topsoil in those areas and revegetate those areas. Probably make them more productive and develop livelihoods from them by doing small-scale agricultural projects on them.
On the areas that would have been quarried before.
Yes, exactly, in abandoned acreages.
So then, is it that now we assign different areas to quarry from, or is quarrying shouldn't be happening at all?
No, quarrying is a necessary activity to support physical development. You know, right. Construction is a requirement for any economy, and ours is no exception. So you're either going to be faced with importing the material, which comes at a cost, or you're going to have to extract it from within your own borders. Yeah, and we've done that to some extent.
So it's essentially a balancing act that we have to play to be able to say, all right, we need to be productive as well as maintain the land.
Exactly. So the government is always faced with the challenge of balancing socioeconomic interests alongside conservation interests.
Now, some of the issues that we have with land degradation, how are we approaching these issues in the context of sustainable development as well, though?
Well, the idea is that, so under this convention, the UNCCD, it's not a tree-hugging convention. It's a people-centric convention. So it's all about improving the improving the living conditions, which also includes the livelihoods of the people that live on your land resources or that occupy your land resources. So the idea is the central premise is to develop projects which have a livelihood component in addition to a conservation component. So those two things are not divorced from each other. And there are a number of entry points the government has been looking at and is seeking to progress further with respect to sustainable land management. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So there's the Global Environmental Fund IW Eco project, which addresses the quarrying issue in Northeast Trinidad. Right. They're partnered up with national quarries and a number of NGOs like the I Am Movement and Vetiver Foundation and Sus Trust. Then there's the Nariva Reforestation Project. That's a bit of a mouthful. There's the Northeast Tobago UNESCO Man and the Biosphere Project. And there's the IFPAM project, which is the Improving Forest and Protected Areas Management Project. And there's an extension from that called the BioReach project, which is yet to come off the ground, but is quite soon to get there.
But what are they intended to do?
All of these projects, like I indicated earlier, centered around not just restoring degraded land resources, but also in terms of generating sustainable livelihoods through things like agroforestry, ecotourism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Makes sense. So you have more on the list? Do you want to share?
There are a few more on the list. There's NGC they have a continual project where they're doing restoration or reforestation along their northeast to southeast pipeline corridor. So I've got a little bit of a list because my memory is so bad. There's the Fonzaman. If you want to go into the non-governmental side of things, they conduct agroforestry and hillside restoration in northwest Trinidad in the St. Anne's Valley.
Yeah, beautiful place actually. I've seen pictures. I haven't actually had the pleasure of being there, but I've seen pictures of Fonzaman. It's quite lovely. So it sounds like you guys are doing the work necessary. But tell me something before we wrap up. What can individuals do? Because I know you're talking about, big ideas and these, reforesting areas is a huge task. And congratulations to you guys and all the NGOs that are involved in it. But how can we as individual citizens play a part in this?
Well, on a personal level or an individual level, people could minimize harmful activities, things that we've traditionally done without actually linking the consequences they have on the environment. For example, how we dispose of waste, setting fires, and that's also linked to waste disposal, because we always seem to think that it's a good idea to incinerate our waste. And we don't make the linkage that if we ignite a fire in our backyards or across the street from our house, that could actually ignite a fire several kilometers away. When burning, become airborne.
Yeah.
Yeah. We could all practice soil conservation and composting, because soil, like land, is a very limited and semi-renewable resource. You can exhaust soil, and the trouble with that is that to replace productive soil actually takes decades. It doesn't happen in a short while.
Wow.
So you can do things like that. You could also invest time and effort into replanting your communities with things like fruit trees and such, and you can attach yourself to the efforts of any number of NGOs that have conservation initiatives, and Fonzaman being an example, if you do live in that area.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I want to thank you very much for joining us this morning, Mr. Julius Smith. I think that I learned a lot this morning. I hope that the people learned a lot as well, because I think this idea of reforestation and land degradation is really important. So thank you very much for joining us this morning to share with us. That's Mr. Julius Smith, environmental biologist. And he works at the Environmental Policy and Planning Division inside the Ministry of Planning and Development. We'll take a quick break and come back with more inside the Now Morning Show. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Not at all. My pleasure.